So this is a video on section 1 for the FSA pathway, both 1 and 2 assessment material. And we've got Steve Millis here and Tony Holes. So Tony, when I look at this top part here, it's really about just gathering information on the building, including the building owner and like a broad range of information. So I just thought we'd look at each individual part one at a time. And then just before we move on, first thing I would say to any student is make sure you've got the latest assessment document. You can download that off eLearn. Make sure that you read the drop-down instructions that is in every single box. And then we're going to give you some examples, and you've got the learner guide to refer to as well for information on what this assessment could look like. But remember, it's got to be in your own words. It must be your own work. So this first section up here, the site name, as long as you're reading these instructions, it's pretty obvious. So you want to use the name of the fire safety schedule. And the key to completing this whole assessment task efficiently is make sure you got something in each box. Don't leave anything empty. And then you got the site address. So this is just the site address, including if it does have a name, if the building or the structure has a name, you can put that in there as well. This box here, the stakeholders, again, from the fire safety schedule. And then...
Yeah, so oftentimes the stakeholder is business or somebody, oftentimes it's not the tenant in the building. And when we do the work, we've got a relationship with the tenant, and they're not necessarily the person that's needing to sign the AFS.
Yeah.
So
it could be a strata.
Yeah.
Yeah, strata as well.
Which may well be the designated agent as well. Or they may endorse an agent who signed the AFSS on behalf of the building owner or the company that owns the building. For example, if it's a big organisation like Coles or Woolworths, they may engage an independent person to take that role on for them. So they would be the designated agent.
So they're like a representative of the owners.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the managing director of Woolworths doesn't have to sign off for every single property that they have. They'll engage a designated agent to do that, ASECG or one of those larger companies that do this type of work specifically for that purpose. And they'll engage and talk to, they'll be the person you'll be engaging and talking to during this process. In fact, they'll be the ones that will probably be contacting you to get this, or at least one measure of the AFS signed off, because oftentimes the more complex buildings have a bunch of different measures, and it may take 4 or 5 different people to endorse any given measure.
Yeah, but where you got multiple contractors that are all coordinating back to that agent.
Yes, yeah, that would be the agent. Yep.
And really, the agent's details is what we want to put in this section here, or the contact details. Again, don't leave any of these sections empty. Then this one here, building use. What's the current use of the building? Now, Tony, are we looking for any evidence to back that up here? Or is that more on this next part where it's asking for the occupation and the DA details? So this would be like an observation of the building use.
Yeah, so those two areas kind of go together, because what we're looking for is a disparity between what the building is being used for and what the design function of any given fire safety measure has been installed to. Mm-hmm. So we're just looking to make sure that the DA and the class of the building and so forth and the use of the building matches to the DA or the occupancy of the building. Because oftentimes, even during COVID, where people were changing the use of the building and manufacturing hand sanitizer in a pub, for example, or they could be storing flammable chemicals or liquids because the warehouse has changed someone else has bought the warehouse and they've changed the use of that warehouse. In which case a DA should have gone in for that, and sometimes it doesn't. And at this point, we can pick that up.
So it's still about gathering that information. So here you're looking at the building, and I can think of an example where I am. There's an old school, and it's now being used as a language school, and they've got people sleeping there.
Yeah.
So it's really changed more to a class 3 building.
Yeah.
Or a class 3 use. So yeah, does the current use match the DA or the last DA that was provided for that building? So here, if you have the DA, we've shown you how to create hyperlinks. Put a link in there so that we can find that DA. And really these two should match. And if they don't, well, that's an area that you're going to have to investigate. Now, what if they don't have any document to provide, Tony, or they're just looking at the
very minimum, Steve? I would think that they'd have to have a crack at it. And the people who would, you get, as an assessor, you get lots of examples of people who have gone the extra mile in this space and contacted the council and really drilled down for the sake of their customer. I would expect to say that, you've either asked the customer to contact the council, which is not going to happen, or you contact the council itself or the local jurisdiction that's managing or sending out the AFSS, because the regulation actually requires, the council doesn't have the right under the new regulation to send this AFSS out to companies unless they've got a fire safety schedule. And the fire safety schedule is being developed from the DA. So there must be something in there into the council about this DA. And it's just been too easy for everybody to say, oh, there's no baseline data, or I don't have that information. And really, moving forward, once you develop this information and you go the extra mile here, it's information that remains, and it makes your life so much easier on the next building, because we find ourselves endorsing. If you don't get this building use and DA matched up, then you're not really doing anybody any favours. In the case like you mentioned, Steve, where somebody's sleeping in the building, there's no smoke detection system because it wasn't required when it was a school, and then all of a sudden, that schedule is actually incorrect. Now, I know it's a can of worms that you're opening, but really we're talking about the people who are sleeping in that building and our obligation to those people. The obligation may not be written down, and I don't know where that would come up in a court of law, but surely as an assessor, we have the responsibility to keep the occupants safe.
Yeah. And I think if you start, as an assessor, if you start brushing over these things and not collecting this data like an occupation certificate or the last DA details, then even in this assessment process that we've developed here, as you get further down the track, if you don't have other evidence, then it starts to get really hard to even just verify, the performance requirements as far as the BCA.
It's almost impossible. I agree.
So that goes on to this one here, a DA or OC that's indicating the class of building that you're looking at. So classes 1 to 10, where does it sit within that building? Because that again is going to affect what you're looking at further down the track in the assessment process. And then building type, which is a little bit different.
Yeah, so the building type fits more into the unit of competency itself. The unit of competency that we're trying to satisfy evidence for here, and students have got to understand that this process might not be the same as their process. They may have a more complex or a simpler process for doing it, and that's irrelevant to us because at the end of the day, we have a unit of competency which has elements in there that this particular one asks us to identify building type, what type of building it is, and in the manual, it goes through several different types of buildings, and you've really just got to put it into one of those categories. It can be a high-rise building, it can be a mid-rise building, a low-rise building, it can be a, I don't know, essentially, if everybody's got their own names for it, and different jurisdictions have different names for it, and there are different definitions, I guess. And we use the Sydney planning definitions of the buildings, Sydney planning. So if you're in South Australia and doing this, there may be different definitions, and hey, so be it. I'm not going to argue too much about that, but we need to identify the building type primarily for the unit of competency to be completed correctly.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then some of the things that are in this assessment tool, you may not be doing in your regular assessment work, and it is just required for this unit of competence.
Yeah.
Just on that too, if you're looking for information, again, there's a really good section in the learning guide that you can get off the eLearn platform.
Yep.
And then this last one here. So briefly describe how that, well, it says building age and modification history. Briefly describe how the building age was determined, including any documents you have and any modifications that might have occurred in that building as well. What I'm getting, Tony, a lot in work that's coming back so far is unknown. Really, just that's quite common. I don't know how old the building is, and I don't know about any modifications. And
well, that comes back to what you were saying before, Steve, with the building use and the occupation. If you don't know the age of the building when you go to assess it against a performance standard, well, which performance standing are you using? The schedule oftentimes doesn't tell you what the date of the standard is for performance, and also the NCC or BCA requirements. And, there was changeover periods there where there was a major change in the requirements of a building's performance or a fire safety measures performance. So this is actually a pretty important part. And it feeds also into the AFSS, the newer version of the annual fire safety statement, provides opportunity for you to endorse building measures under different performance standards. Now, as things move on, I believe that the DA and the way the schedule is created will allow more for this. But essentially, giving an example of giving the example of a nursing home where a sprinkler system was required to be put in under recent changes of legislation. Well, that new DA is in addition to the old DA. So part of the building is under this DA, and it may only be that particular measure that's under that DA, whereas the rest of the building is under a different DA and held to a different standard. So I think it's just really important that we make that clear in any decision or anything that we do, because when we're endorsing a measure, I think it's important that we specify any caveats that we put on that endorsement, at least in our paperwork, because it doesn't give you that opportunity in any great detail on the AFSS. However, if ever this thing turns pear-shaped on you, you have a process. And essentially, this is what this process is all about, is us being able to identify somebody else being able to follow a due process and collect the information that is relevant to an outcome. And in this case, an outcome is the performance of a particular fire safety measure. So if you want to determine the age of a building, you can do it in a number of different ways. You can go oftentimes if the you can go to the oldest hose reel in the building and put the manufacture date off the hose reel. That'll give you a rough idea of the age of the building. Or any piece of equipment that has a date stamp on it can give you that idea. You can talk to the building owner. You can talk to some of the people in the building or people around that building, because buildings were built in periods, and oftentimes buildings were built a lot around about the same time, because areas were developed in similar times. And once again, we're not looking for specific dates here. We're just looking for a period that would be relevant to the performance standard that we're trying to get to in section 6. And as you said, if this section is not filled in correctly, because you know what it's like, Steve, you look at this section here and then you look at section 6 and you say, hang on a minute, this person is holding this building to a completely different standard to the actual requirement, because some of the schedules are just so unclear. They don't give us the detail that we want.
No, and I think it just loops back to here, like you said before, like, which is why, okay, doing your homework, actually contacting council to try and obtain these documents can help fill some of the gaps down here, and then can also help fill some of those gaps where, you know, you do get hold of a schedule, but you've got years of, or you've got no BCA on it, you've got no years of standards, things like that. Well, you know, you then using an evidence-based approach to determine what you're going to assess to, because you've got to assess to something and you've got to make a decision. So by having various different pieces of information, you can more confidently drill down on exactly what the performance requirements are, which is kind of the first step in the scope of works that's identified by our friends at the governing body. So
yeah, and I guess if you get it wrong, if you get this information incorrect to start with, then the mistake's going to be duplicated every year you endorse something.
Yeah.
So this is probably, you know, it may seem fairly arbitrary that we're putting these details in, but it is really important information, as we've said, because it's normally only got to be collected once. And I think, you know, investing that time for future work, it'll just save you so much time in the future. But you're going to have to make that investment, whether you charge your customer for that or not, it's going to be up to you. But
yeah,
I think that investment's well worthwhile in this first section.
All right, thank you.